So last night, Ayanda and I watched Before Sunrise for the first time together. If you know me, you know that this is one of my all-time favorite trilogies, which, fun fact for Sunrise Heads, or whatever we're called, was actually meant to be a quadrilogy. They literally came up with an idea for the fourth film. But sadly, Julie Delpy doesn't want to participate, but all power to her. I mean, it sounds like she has a really good reason for it. I think she's feeling really burned out on acting and producing in Hollywood. She gave a public comment talking about her most recent Netflix series and how difficult it was to secure the funding. And I imagine after just decades of sexism and all the things she's faced, she wants a well-deserved break. But Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, and Richard Linklater just really served in these three incredible films, which, if you've never seen them, I can tell you a little bit about what their subject matter is. So the story takes place in 1995. Ethan Hawke's character, Jesse, is a young, kind of listless, recently broken-hearted American who is traveling for a few weeks before taking a cheap flight back to America after he realized that his girlfriend, who had been studying abroad in Spain, no longer wants to be with him. Celine, who is also the same age as Jesse, is an optimistic, hardworking, very intelligent French student at the Sorbonne. And in a very fateful meeting, Celine actually wasn't ordinarily sitting next to Jesse on the train, but because of an arguing German couple, she seeks a new seat. They end up sitting right next to each other. They kind of catch each other's vibe. They start chatting. They talk about the books they're reading and the events of the film set into place when Jesse says, I have a crazy idea, but what if you got off the train with me here in Vienna and we spent the day just wandering around together? I don't have a hotel. Do you want to look back on your life and say that you didn't get off the train? It's kind of the inciting incident to this love story that develops between the two of them. At first, it's a bit awkward and clumsy because, they are strangers, but they start walking around the city together, talking about their thoughts on life, love, breakups, therapy, art, career, parents, family, children, society. And though they're both young and classically 23 in different ways, Jesse is pretty disillusioned, thinks he understands the world completely. Celine's very idealistic and hopeful. They have this undeniable chemistry and connection. And Celine really profoundly says that if God exists, it's in this space between us with two people trying to get to know each other, trying to truly understand one another. They meet an interesting host of characters during their walk around Vienna. A poet who only charges if you find that the poem he wrote for you adds something to your life. A palm reader who instigates their first kind of little quarrel. Two funny German men who are acting in a play that they never end up making it to. The whole movie is this sort of non-stop talking between two people who are just slowly getting to know one another. Now, films like this are quite rare nowadays. Obviously, there are incredible indie films being made every day. But one of the things that really struck me upon, I think this is like my 13th or so rewatch, is the way that the film is so indicative of life in 1995. Internets, word processors, laptops, computers were just starting to become an idea in the consciousness of the average person. Most people, you had to have tons of money to be able to afford a computer. They were clunky, they were at home, mobile phones weren't like a huge thing. And so it allowed for this kind of nostalgic vibe, technology-free, just really getting to meet someone, really getting to know someone. And of course, you could write letters or have calls, but Celine and Jesse decided they don't even want to exchange contact information because it somehow cheapens the beauty of this one perfect night they're having together. And there's this really poetic moment where he says, I want to just take a picture of you. I want to remember this. And he doesn't whip out an iPhone because iPhones didn't exist. He just looks at her. He just really takes in her image. Now, the second movie in the franchise takes place both 9 years later for both the actors and the characters. You'll probably remember that Richard Linklater, the director of this film, is also known for the film Boyhood, which he filmed with an actor each year as the child actually grew up. So he seems to have this kind of fascination with how time actually affects the real-world counterparts who are portraying these stories. Something I loved learning as well is that the three of them, Julie Delpy, Ethan Hawke, and Richard Linklater, collaborate together a lot on the scripts and often will improvise and change scenes according to what feels right. They're all collaborators on writing this thing. Also fascinatingly, The first script that arrived for this film was meant to take place in Texas. It was meant to be two Americans meeting on a train. How different would that have been? So the two characters, Julie Delpy portraying Celine and Ethan Hawke portraying Jesse, did not meet up with each other, spoiler alert, after the 6 months after the first film. It's revealed to us that he came back to Vienna and looked for her, hung up flyers, but he couldn't find her. And it turns out that her grandmother had passed away, and so she wanted to be there, but she couldn't. And this fateful moment, because they didn't exchange addresses or contact information or last names or anything like that, they couldn't find each other. There wasn't a Facebook, there wasn't a directory they could look each other up in. And even if they could, what would they look up? Just a first name? Interestingly, the second film finds them in a very different mindset. Jesse, who has thought about that night that they met pretty much nonstop since it happened, has written a best-selling novel about it, which is what brings them back together. He writes this novel. His last stop on the book tour is in Paris, where Celine is from. They have this iconic bookshop where he's giving a little talk, answering some questions from reporters about whether or not the story was real. And Celine shows up there in the audience, and he's shocked to see her. I mean, this woman that he's fantasized about and thought about for years, that he wrote this whole book about, who really changed his life and also broke his heart, is suddenly there again. The two, in what is just such an interesting directorial decision, just immediately start walking and talking and recreate the same magic and movement of the first film, though because we know a little bit more about them, it doesn't have such a slowness, yet there is still the kind of impending doom that he has to fly back home. So we know that there is an end, just like the first film, that before sunset, something's got to happen. They've got to resolve this issue that they have with each other. We start learning more about how Celine is no longer that wide-eyed, optimistic, hopeful person she was. She's been kind of crushed in ways by the world. She sees the ways that wars are increasing, that capitalism is destroying everything, and she's beginning to feel a bit cynical, kind of different from how she was in the first film, where she had so much hope and ambition and excitement about life. And Jesse's character, in contrast to how he was in the first film, he was very assured of himself, thought everything was a scam, everyone's kind of out to get you. In this film, he talks about how he thinks the world's getting better, how he feels like he didn't really know anything when he was young, how he's open to the things that he lost and being more present in the moment. He has this beautiful vignette thinking back on this band that he was in and how much he just wanted to get signed to a record label and become successful. And now he's not even in a band. He's a writer now, and he just misses the opportunity that he had to just have fun with his friends and really embrace all that life had to offer. In direct parallel to the first film, the two have these awkward moments where they're trying to move a strand out of the other's hair, but to turn away just in time so they don't see. There's lots of parallels as well between the emotional mindsets of young Jesse and young Celine versus older Celine and older Jesse. Jesse is still fascinated with time. He always has these ideas of a whole life lived in a pop song, or in the first movie, he talks about a round-the-world TV show that streams 24 hours a day. He's really interested in how time affects people's lives, and so it makes sense that his book is called This Time. Whereas Celine is very occupied with the way that relationships impact her. In the first film, she talks about how she feels like she's an old woman who's laying down to go to sleep, to die, and is reflecting on all of her life as if she's living inside a memory. She talks about how she feels this unnatural obsession with people she doesn't even really like that have hurt her, and how in breakups, like, her bits of herself are given away that she can't get back, and she's becoming more cynical and more distrustful towards the world. This is getting kind of long, but if you would like for me to continue this series, dive a little bit more into this trilogy, some fun facts about the creation of it, the writing of it, I would love to, because I love these movies and I could talk about them all day. The third movie is in fact my favorite, so I would love to specifically talk about Before Midnight, so I'm probably going to make another video.